Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us as well. We're joined by Dov Alfon, former editor-in-chief of Israeli newspaper Haaretz, former editor of Zaman France, Emre Demir, and France24.com's Lila Jacinto. Now, Donald Trump, we were talking about Emmanuel Macron before the break. Donald Trump, for his part, well, he's once again this week, for the first week of 2018, really been in with a bang, firing on all cylinders, threatening the Palestinians, Pakistan, and North Korea. Let's begin with these images from the West Bank and Gaza, who've officially dubbed that threat to cut U.S. aid to the Palestinians as a blackmail. Dov Alfon, has it gone the way you expected it would when Trump announced the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
In a way, yes. I think that it's really a declaration that had absolutely no effect on the region, if you look at it very closely. Now, his sentence, his tweet really, that he might cut out the subvention to UNRWA would subsidize the Gaza Strip. This is more interesting because suddenly a lot of Palestinians have to realize the huge amounts the US is pouring into Gaza in humanitarian aid via UNRWA. And suddenly these numbers don't add up because the real responsible for the entire mess in the Middle East, from my point of view, is really France and Britain via the Sykes-Picot Accords and then, you know, the British Mandate and the Balfour Declaration. These people are not paying for the Palestinian tragedy as much as they should. It's Donald Trump voters who are paying. And suddenly the US president reminds people of that way. I don't think he will cut out the aid, but it's suddenly a chilling sentence, and this is what suddenly get all those Palestinian youth outside, because this is real. It's not a declaration about Jerusalem. This is real. This is really their daily life. Everybody in Gaza knows the UNRWA office. Everybody.
Yeah, but Dov, it's not only Gaza. I mean, UNRWA is providing basic services, education, health services to some 5 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, some still in Syria, in the West Bank, in West Jerusalem, and in Gaza, in all those places. So to take away the money from UNRWA is to invite all kinds of problems.
It's irresponsible, of course. This is why I think it won't happen. But it certainly seems interesting that the Palestinians are not willing to let the US really dictate their own conduct. And this is why I think it's going to be very difficult to maintain. And really, those small demonstrations are only the beginning of what could really a new anger raging, maybe even through the refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan, and not only inside Palestine. And this is something that clearly Donald Trump really hasn't thought, I think, till the end.
What a surprise!
Thought all the way through. Donald Trump, though, did make, he's only threatening when it comes to the Palestinians. He's made good on his threat to cut military aid to Pakistan. Islamabad expressing disappointment and trying to take in the new reality in Washington.
We have no doubt or fear as the defense of Pakistan is in competent and strong hands. The only thing we fear is that America may really take an extraordinary action, which may cause us harm. We are preparing for that.
Is Pakistan prepared for that?
I think so. You know, Pakistan has been in this situation before. It's been a very choppy relationship, and Pakistan really plays the long game. You know, they calculate that this will last for some time before a new administration comes in, before State Department moves in, and we go back to, you know, the old gear of Washington having to work with Islamabad. What does not happen is that Washington plays it in a, does not look at the long-term picture. So they do these short-terms they cut the ties, they cut aid, but for the longest time, for 50 years, and certainly after 9/11, Washington has been accusing Pakistan of duplicity at the worst, or not, not cracking down on terrorism, but never manages to play the long-term game of what is this fundamental change that needs to happen to this relationship.
This week, the announcement that Pakistan will now do its transactions with China in yuan is dangling the thread of a full 180-degree turn towards China. Going to have an effect on Washington?
Not really. I mean, this is what you hear even in Africa when, the West starts asking African states to live up to democratic or human rights principles. They always talk about China. China is building the Silk Road, but the Pakistani military is closely tied with the U.S. military. The Pakistani elites are very much entwined with the West. The Air Force has all sorts of technological deals with the U.S. China and Pakistan...
I don't know. I mean, I think that actually the focus of the ire of Trump and particularly of the generals around him is the Pakistani military. It's not the civilian government. It's specifically the Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI, which forever has been playing footsie with the Taliban, helped to create the Taliban in the first place. We know that the Haqqani network operates out of Pakistan. Lots of Taliban do. Taliban leaders have been killed by American drones in Pakistan. All of that has gone on. Everybody understood it all along. So when he's talking about Pakistan supporting terrorism, he's talking about the military supporting terrorism. China, yes, of course, China's going to try and pick up the pieces there, just as it's doing in a lot of other places around the world. And a lot of countries that don't want to listen to America, this is what you're saying about a lot of things, are turning to China or to Russia.
And Donald Trump rising to the bait of Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech, which mixed an opening with Seoul on the one hand with that Olympic truce that's now in the works ahead of next month's Winter Games in Pyeongchang, and the claim that Kim now has a nuclear button on his desk. Donald Trump, yes, rising to the bait with, I guess you got to call it the tweet of the week. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I, too, have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works. Exclamation point, Emre Demir.
If you can't control your tweeting habits, then just don't tweet. This is the main problem. I mean, for example, we talked about Pakistan, Palestine, North Korea. It wasn't a surprise. Trump, even in the 80s, he reiterated his positions about, U.S. military aid. It's nothing new. This was his election promise. The real problem is that he's tweeting out about this. It becomes more complicated.
Is this part of a strategy to own the news cycle, or is this just impulse?
It's just impulse. Obviously, we try to complicate, the subject. Is it a strategy? We can make, diagrams. So it's an impulse. It's obvious.
I think it's instinct, but I do think it's about controlling the news cycle. But I also think it's a reaction actually to the other part of Kim Jong-un's speech, because what's happening now is that Kim Jong-un and the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, are starting to talk. And that is going
so U.S. foreign policy works. Maybe now the Palestinians and the Israelis are going
far from it. Far from
Thanks to Trump's
because
tweet.
if they are talking, I can guarantee the thing they're not talking about is taking the nuclear button off of Kim Jong-un's desk. And that's the concern of the United States. That's what the entire American policy has been about. And right now, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un are deeply undermining that policy. They may calm things, but we are not going to get that button off of Kim Jong-un's desk. And that's the point of American policy.
Okay, we talked about American foreign policy, which brings us all to that book. The way Michael Wolff describes it, no one paid any attention to the journalist and writer all the time he had access to the White House these past months. His bestseller, Fire and Fury, hitting bookstores this Friday, with the distinct sense that this is an accidental president. In one excerpt, he writes, shortly after 8 p.m. on election night, when the unexpected trend with Trump might actually win seemed confirmed, Donald Trump Jr. told a friend that his father looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Melania was in tears and not of joy, Christopher Dickey.
Well, I think that also corroborates what I was told by people who were there on election night. And they weren't that intimate with them, but they thought that Trump looked deeply surprised and almost upset. And clearly Melania was upset. She was upset at the inauguration. So why was that? Because I think Wolf lays it out pretty well. They thought this would be a branding exercise, that running for president would make Trump far and away the biggest brand in the world. And if he lost, he could profit from that. And anything he had done during the campaign, including members of his family playing footsie with the Russians, none of that was going to matter. It was, as I think I said on this show some months ago, it was like the producers. It was all going to be great unless you won.
The film, the producers.
And then they won.
And then they won. In an interview with NBC's Today Show, the author Wolf is pretty definitive that it's not the Democrats, but the president's own entourage that questions his abilities.
According to your reporting, everyone around the president, senior advisors, family members, every single one of them questions his intelligence and fitness for office.
Let me put a marker in the sand here. 100% of the people around him.
One of the more disturbing observations you make in the book is that the president's close advisors, people around him, have noticed him repeating stories, expression for expression, you say, within a short period of time.
In a shortening period. So they've all tracked this, that it used to be, I know people would point out that in the beginning it was like every 25 or 30 minutes you would get the same 3 stories repeated. Now it's the same 3 stories in every 10 minutes.
Oh, and what's the suggestion there? Because that goes beyond saying, okay, the president's not an intellectual. I mean, what are you arguing there? You say, for example, that he was at Mar-a-Lago and didn't recognize lifelong friends.
I will quote Steve Bannon, he's lost it.
Dov Alfond, it's always a little bit risky to play psychologist, right? When you're not a
well, first of all,
qualified physician.
Yeah, we can all be happy that a book is at the center of intellectual life in the US this week. It doesn't happen a lot, so already I'm very happy about it. And then I think that Donald Trump succeeded as a political and communication animal he is. To turn this book was a catastrophe yesterday as a kind of Steve Bannon book. It's not a book about him. It's not a book about Donald Trump. It's a book about a former advisor who was Steve Bannon, and now he has problem, and he's a rat, and he's a traitor, etc., etc. And I think he's going to survive the revelations, the outstanding revelation in the book, simply by continuing to focus on an internal war inside the Republican Party. He's very good at it, you know. He's very good at this. He's very bad at everything else, but he's very good at this.
So you don't agree with Michael Wolff's assertion that he's lost it or that he's...
I think I agree completely with C.S. Dickey that he has instincts. Now, animals have instincts and children have instincts. So I think there is a childish president in the United States, but he has instinct, and he has very good instincts.
Yeah, I think there are 2 things to remember here. First of all, in the what's true, what's not true debate here, as people have written recently, and I think it's spot on, Trump doesn't lie because he thinks you'll believe it. He lies because he thinks you'll have to believe it, because he's so powerful, he's going to ram his lies down your throat, like, for instance, the size of the inaugural crowd. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you have to remember, and this is not an insignificant fake news kind of item, is the stock market broke an all-time record. At 25,000 on the Dow. Now, that's not something that doesn't affect anybody. It's not just a random number. That's made a lot of people in America feel a lot richer, especially the people who are looking at a tax cut that he's going to give them that'll last, for some of them, for a long time, for some of them only about 5 years. All of that is going to militate in his favor as we move forward. Unless he actually starts drooling on camera, which, you know, is possible, I don't think anybody who supports him and is favorable to him is going to buy the senility argument, which is in fact what Wolff was hinting at. And isn't that just a little coy? Wolff will say all these things, but he won't say, I think the guy's, losing it because he's senile. No, it doesn't say that. So there are all these kinds of games being played. And I think Trump's instincts generally have proved stronger than his enemies.
Yeah, a real revelation for me from the excerpts. I didn't read the book yet, but this is a political team, the entourage of Trump. How can a political team can hate each other this much? The origin of this book, they hate each other. They hate each other.
Yeah.
All of this content of the book, Bannon, Praris, etc. They hate each other, and the book is. I have that feeling too. The book is about the entourage of Trump, not only about Trump. We don't have a enormous revelation about Trump, at least from the excerpts.
Yeah, I mean, we're making so much noise about this. We're all going to buy this book. This is the best publicity for a book publisher. But no, I don't really see, and I agree with Chris Dickey, what difference is this going to make? Initially we thought like, okay, now this falling up with Bannon has become so public. Will Trump lose his base, the base that Bannon speaks to? Some of the Republican Party establishment seemed positively happy that they could distance themselves from Bannon. Bannon has not responded quite as in such a pugnacious way as Trump. And I think Trump will pretty much ride this on. We are not seeing any difference about this. The fact that he's not an intellectual, that he's probably senile, also not new. We're pretty well aware of it. We know that he's running a cantankerous house. So I think this is just another case of like, this is a great story, but in terms of what is the impact of this, not really sure it's going to make that much of an impact.
All right, earlier we heard Christopher Dickey say the words fake news. Well, on Wednesday, Emmanuel Macron promised reporters a bill as early as next month to combat fake news.
An outline of the law will soon be published. During election periods, on social media platforms, content will no longer abide by the same rules. Increased obligations for transparency will be imposed on social media platforms concerning all sponsored content, as well as those who control them, but also to limit the amount of funding given to these contents.
Legal Jacinto, it's true that laws when it comes to election periods hadn't been updated for the digital era, but will this bill work?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we don't have any details on it. I mean, the intent, of course, one has to welcome it, but we really have to wait for how are we going to go about this. Of course, I mean, if he's giving more money to Franz Weinkat, or in a bid to counter this fake news, well and good, but I think the devil will be in the details of how are we going to actually combat this. I mean, Macron, of course, has a vested interest in this because, on the campaign trail, the Russian fake news industry went after him. But not sure how this would actually play out.
The start of 2018 is the start of the launch in French of the Russian media outlet RT. Is this an anti-RT bill?
Oh, well, I think it absolutely is, but it's a classic slippery slope kind of thing. It's very doubtful that the law is going to single out, as in fact Macron did when he was standing right beside Putin, single out RT and Sputnik and say they're agents of the Russian state and they're not news agencies at all. That's what this law sounds like it's directed at. But if he doesn't...
But it's also, in fairness, it does also sound like it's directed towards the likes of Facebook for not flagging what is sponsored content.
Well, I think that in fact he's thinking about RT and Sputnik, but that's precisely why it's a slippery slope kind of situation, because he's not going to name them. I doubt they'll be named in the law. And then all of a sudden we have this law, which we don't have the text of, but we could have a law where a different administration or even Macron on a different time could use that law to put a lot of pressure on people who are not purveyors of fake news. They're just purveyors of news he doesn't like.
Emery Demir?
Well, I don't have a good feeling about this law. It's too early maybe to call a shot, but I think that this fake news problem is a problem created by Facebook, created by Twitter. And they keep saying that we are a platform. They are not a platform. They have become a media company. So they have to act like that. The origin of the problem is Facebook, GAFA, we can call GAFA, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other social media platforms. And I don't have a good feeling about the French government trying to correct this problem. And authority, I don't make a shortcut, but in authoritarian countries, it always starts like this. You have to make a law to fight against fake news, etc.
Dov Alfon?
The first democratic elected president of France was Napoleon III, and Paris was flooded with fake news because a previous invention, the mobile press. Everybody could suddenly print pamphlets against Napoleon III, and huge laws, I think something like 100 laws, were passed in the Parliament of France and in the Senate to counter this. It didn't succeed. In the end, it took 30 years for the people to be more adult and to understand what is a fake pamphlet and what is a real newspaper. And this is how we live today. And we live in a democracy yet, and the French Republic is working. So I think this law is really very dangerous, and I believe it won't help solve any problem.
And that's where we'll leave it for now, but we're not done yet. Dov Alfon, I want to thank you. Lila Jacinto, Emre Demir, Christopher Dickey. Speaking of news, real and fake, Media Watch is next. We say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
What'll it be this Friday, real or fake for the news?
Oh, how very dare you. If there's anything fake, it is only because I am bringing it to your attention, obviously, I hope. Yes, indeed. Starting out with, of course, the visit of President Erdogan to Paris, which really has set social media alight today here in France. And it's interesting to see. There have also been some reactions from cartoonists too, including this one from Na, where they're tying together two of the stories you've been discussing today, Macron's law against fake news and the fact that President Erdogan is visiting. And here we have Emmanuel Macron explaining his law to the Turkish president, saying, and there you go, all of your imprisonings will be justified. And he says, you're a genius. So there we go. That's one way of looking at the law on fake news and the visit of Erdogan to Paris. This person, very similar theme, really, this tweet, an image from the two of them together, saying Macron and Erdogan compare their vision of freedom of expression. And there's a whole imagined conversation here before you accuse me of fake news. This is imagined. And it says that Macron is talking to him about his new service, his new digital service against fake news. It'll basically inundate, flood social media with information directly from the government to chase away all of those other things that are contradicting it. And Erdogan there is saying impressive. Plantu, the French cartoonist, has been redistributing this one again, Happy Newspaper in Turkey, as opposed to Happy New Year, because, of course, Erdogan and Turkey in particular have the highest number of journalists in jail right now, according to the CPJ, the Council for the Protection of Journalists. At the end of last year, they calculated 73 journalists in prison in Turkey, the highest number anywhere in the world, 262 in total. The French television presenter Elise Lucet, among those, calling on Emmanuel Macron really to bear this in mind when he receives Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Mr. President, don't forget our brothers and sisters, our colleagues incarcerated. And it's a subject very close to her heart because she says her goddaughter is among those currently locked up for being a journalist. So an interesting note from her. This Twitter user saying, pointing out really the irony that just a few days ago, the French president was giving his New Year best wishes to the press corps. And today he's invited, as they put it here, the bloke with the biggest prison for journalists that we have in the world. Marine Le Pen, interestingly, the leader of the National Front, hasn't chosen to criticise Emmanuel Macron for inviting Mr. Erdogan here. What she has chosen instead is to talk about how the killing off of freedoms in Turkey should mean that we, for once and for all, kill off the opportunity and the bid for Turkey to have full membership to the EU. Now, of course, Emmanuel Macron's talking about perhaps some kind of partnership rather than a full membership. But it's interesting that she's chosen not to criticise the French president on this occasion. Other criticisms, though, have come from Femen, the protesters who took to the streets, as they tend to do, bare-breasted as usual, and they brought their own menu along for what they called a sort of a cannibal's lunch, really. And it's been better explained here by one of the Femen members. Cannibal lunch, women carpaccio, mashed curds, boiled journalists, hashed human rights and pudding of gays. Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. Now, 4 of their members have been arrested today. And also interesting to note, Twitter has actually suspended the account of Femen France today. Lots of people very upset about the fact that that's disappeared.
All right. And we were talking earlier about that book again.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, who isn't talking about that book? It has to be said. What a lot of people are asking right now is just how much of it should we believe? And basically, who is Michael Wolff? Because for many of us, he's not internationally known. The New York Times has done a great profile on him, which is well worth a look at. They say that they describe him as a prime piranha in the Manhattan media pond. He was a local journalist. He's very well known in the New York area. They say he's now reached a new level of notoriety